You announced your candidacy for DA before Seth Williams decided he wasn't going to seek another term. So, one, what exactly made you want to jump in the race at that point, and how long did it take you to make the decision to jump in the district attorney race?
Great question. So, listen, for those of you who are not excited enough about doing your homework or otherwise not distracted visually, you can check aspects of my platform and so on the website, which is krasnerforda.com. That's KRASNERFORDA.com. And there's a lot more specifics on the little bit I'll get to say today on that website. But anyway, why did I decide to get in? Well, I decided to get in, frankly, because there was no other candidate in the race who I believed was truly progressive. And having been in court 4 to 5 days a week for 30 years, trying cases in the criminal system, and also having been a civil rights lawyer all those years, I felt like it was a time for massive change.
But just if you don't mind me asking, why now? Like, since Seth Williams had a couple terms, what made you think this was the right time as not beforehand?
Seth went in as a reform candidate, and he had some people around him who had some very good ideas. A lot of us were hopeful that he was going to do some things, but the truth is, as soon as he got into office, his promise not to seek the death penalty went out the window. And as much as I do not like to bash him personally, because I think that he's in such a spot right now, he doesn't need anyone else piling on. I think it's kind of inescapable that what happened with Seth is that he got into office and did what his predecessors did. He immediately started thinking about running for another office. And so the commitments he made, the reform platform that he laid down, about 80% of it went out the window. He did achieve a few things that were favorable, but he became yet one more DA who was simply filling up prisons and pursuing the death penalty and doing a lot of other things that don't make it safer but step on the necks of poor people.
And like you mentioned, when Seth Williams was seeking the district attorney office, he was the more progressive reform candidate. So at what point do you think, you said that he didn't obviously fulfill all those, but my question to you is, do you think the change from Lynn Abraham to Seth Williams, has the office gotten more progressive at all in Seth Williams' time at all?
Well, I think that, Lynn Abraham is almost nationally emblematic of the worst in prosecutors of that era. Everything with her was about politics, and the politics were about appearing to be as draconian and as tough on people as you possibly could. This is a prosecutor who managed to bring Amnesty International to look at Philadelphia's court system for injustice. This is a person who ended up on the cover of Time magazine for her relentless pursuit of the death penalty. A death penalty, by the way, that does not make anybody safer, but has gutted funding for our public schools. So it would be very hard not to improve over that. And yes, by that standard, Seth Williams certainly was more liberal, more progressive. But his achievements are nowhere near what he promised, and they're nowhere near what is necessary. I can go into some detail if you'd like, but feel free to jump in. I think we all know that mass incarceration is so out of hand that not only liberals and progressives like myself, but a lot of Republicans agree that mass incarceration is out of control. Well, we got here because of Lynn Abraham. We got here because of Seth Williams. We got here because of policies that year after year after year relentlessly stuck more people in jail, so that between the 1970s and now, there's been a 700% increase in the Pennsylvania state prison population. There's been a 500% increase in the national prison population. Philadelphia, in some ways, is even worse in terms of its prison population. And the United States is the most incarcerated nation in the world of all nations.
So, Larry, excuse me, how are we going to stop this increase of mass incarceration? What do you propose if you are district attorney in Philadelphia? How are you going to turn that around and really fix this system to stop mass incarceration of especially African Americans and other minorities here in the city?
I think it's a little bit like the difference between doing an operation with a chainsaw or a scalpel. I would propose to move towards the scalpel. And what that means is that we recognize what all criminologists know to be true, which is that 6% of criminals commit 60% of the serious crimes. What we have been doing is we have been treating 100% of the people like the 6% who really need to be in jail, who really need to be separated from society. And we need to look at that other 94%, the group who need some jail time, but not as much as they've been getting, and then the group who need probation but conviction, and then the group who don't need conviction or probation at all, but they may need some sort of other support or sanction or some other form of accountability. It's not a little difference. It's a huge difference. In the 1970s, that level of incarceration had been about the same for decades. And then came the, quote, war on drugs, unquote, which everyone recognizes has been a terrible failure. And with that came mandatory sentencing and sentencing guidelines and district attorneys who always ran for office by promising longer sentences and harsher sentences, and that they would pursue the highest possible charge. It would be one thing if any of it worked. But look where we are now, and I say this as someone who's 56 years old. I started my legal career exactly 30 years ago in a month or two, and I've been in court all that time. And the statistics support everything I saw day after day. What the statistics are showing us is that Philadelphia remains, of the 10 major cities, the poorest. Philadelphia, as of 2014 anyway, had the highest rate of homicide of any of the 10 major cities, the 10 largest cities in the United States. So, we also have public schools that require something like $5 billion in repairs that are being closed and sold. We have public schools with low graduation rates where there are 35 kids in a classroom instead of the 20 or 22 that I experienced when I went through public schools all the way from kindergarten through high school. Okay? It doesn't work. Every statistic tells you that public schools reduce crime, that economic opportunity reduces crime. And yet we take all of our money and we spend it on jail cells instead of spending it on public school teachers and proper schools. It just doesn't work. We need to go a different direction.
Joining us on WHIP Radio right now is candidate for Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, one of the 7 Democrats in this field for the primary happening next month here in the city of Philadelphia. Larry, you are one of the candidates that mentioned that you are strictly against the death penalty. So my question to you, one, that's obviously a very progressive point of view. One, how long have you been opposed to it, and what led you to getting to that point?
To the best of it changes day by day because, frankly, what happened here is I announced my platform in February, and then I found out that all the other candidates who hadn't announced their platforms were chasing me, okay? So I can't tell you whether I'm still the only one who is against the death penalty, but I am the one who said first and has always been consistent that I'm against the death penalty, and by that I mean I would not seek it as long as I was district attorney in any case. How long have I been against it? I've been against it since about the middle of my law school years. I actually served on a death penalty jury when I was 22 years old. It was a formative experience for me. It came before I started law school in California. I went to Stanford Law School. And, I realized on that jury how much racial bias was in play when we were in the back in that jury room. And it wasn't just racial bias against the defendant. It was also racial bias by one juror against another. We actually had a juror who was so severely mentally ill that he had to be removed from the jury during deliberations. That experience tells you something about how perfect the system is in which a group of people are going to decide who lives and dies. But I think more to the point, when I got to law school and I actually saw the statistics, and I saw the incredibly racist outcomes, the incredibly inaccurate outcomes that went with the death penalty, and I spent a lot of time reading the opinions of Supreme Court Justice Brennan, who was famously against the death penalty for a very, very long time, I just became utterly convinced and persuaded that it was unwise and that it was immoral. Honestly, it's a lot bigger than that, though, because even if you think it's morally okay, and some people do, and I respect that, but even if you think that, it's been one of the worst wastes of money ever. We haven't actually executed anyone in Pennsylvania against his or her will since 1962, when I was 1 year old. And yet it has cost $1 billion to pursue this non-existent death penalty. What we really have is a death sentence that is never carried out against someone's will. But it costs $1 billion. And in human terms, wasting $1 billion since the 1970s means that we could have had at $40,000 per school teacher for a year of work, per young school teacher. We could have had 500 public school teachers across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania every year since the 1970s, or we could have had a death sentence that is never carried out with the involuntary execution of anyone. To me, that's nuts. And every other northeastern city, every single other northeastern city, no longer has available the possibility of a prosecutor seeking the death penalty. There are cities to the south of us that no longer have the possibility of a prosecutor seeking the death penalty, like Wilmington, for example. So why are we so attached to this thing that costs a fortune, that guts our public schools, and is never carried out? I don't care if you think it's immoral or not. It just doesn't make any sense.
Larry, you were talking about how the schools here in Philadelphia, they need money, $5 billion to be exact. I was looking at your platform in regards to civil forfeiture. The district attorney office retains a lot, I think it's millions and millions of dollars that it collects from citizens here in the city. What would you do to reform civil forfeiture procedures, and where would you put that money? Would you send that to the schools? What exactly would you do in the district attorney's office?
There's a certain amount of control that you have and that you don't have as district attorney. And the truth is, a lot of these solutions require some teamwork between our mostly progressive, mayor, state attorney general Josh Shapiro, people in city council, some of the state reps, and our police commissioner, who actually is a very progressive, forward-thinking guy, Commissioner Ross. That teamwork right now is possible because we have so many progressives who are in those positions. And what they really need is to have a really progressive district attorney in there as well. But in terms of how do you do that? Well, look, there's $300 million being spent just on State Road in Philadelphia, on the Philadelphia County prison facilities up there, $300 million. If you have a modest goal of, and this, by the way, is the goal of the McCluskey Foundation, which has studied in Philadelphia, but if you have the modest goal of reducing that inmate population by a third, now let's remember something. In the 1970s, to get back to that level, we'd have to reduce it 84%. So I'm only talking about reducing it 33%, right? But if you were to do that, then at least in theory, you could be freeing up a third of that budget, which is $100 million. $100 million can do a whole heck of a lot of good. Similar issues exist with civil asset forfeiture. The problem there is civil asset forfeiture has been basically a machine that has taken money, much of it unjustifiably, from poor people who can't defend their homes or can't defend their cars because, somebody's nephew used it, or maybe grandma's grandson used it and committed a crime in it, or at least was around crime in it. And so what has happened is that the district attorney's office has been taking property that it should properly take from legitimate convictions for criminal activity where the property itself is either a tool that was used to commit the crime or is the produce of the crime. They've been doing that, but they've also been doing a ton of stealing. They have been taking houses from grandma that she shouldn't lose because she didn't do anything wrong, and cars. And they've been taking a lot of cash off poor people just because they saw them, buy some weed on the corner or something like that, and they've been keeping it. I mean, one of the great outrages here is that the district attorney's office has used this confiscated money as a slush fund, and they have been able to use it for their own purposes. So it's been incentivized for them to take money away from people who aren't even entitled to court-appointed attorneys to defend their property because, of course, this is a civil proceeding. It's not like a criminal proceeding where you get a public defender, right? So that has to end. You can't have money flowing from forfeiture that goes to the DA because that incentivizes it. And you also can't have a system where you're voraciously trying to take assets away from poor people when they're innocent and don't deserve to have it done. Yes, I realize that if you stop stealing, that means you have less stolen money to spend. I get that. But some things are just wrong, and they're unacceptable. And we can't have a society that thrives off of government stealing from poor people.
Joining us on WHIP Radio right now, Larry Krasner, candidate for Philadelphia District Attorney, one of the 7 Democrats seeking this office in the primary next month. Larry, we really appreciate the time, but I have another question for you, though. In your last answer, you mentioned that the mayor of Philadelphia, Mayor Kenny, rather progressive, the current commissioner, Richard Ross, also being progressive as well. But in your interview with Holly Otterbein of Philadelphia Magazine, you mentioned that John McNesby and the leadership of the FOP have hijacked the membership of the FOP. So obviously I know Ross does not have the final say in who the FOP endorsed because we know they endorsed Rich Negrin. But I want you to please expand on what do you mean that McNesby and the leadership has hijacked the FOP? And if it wasn't McNesby in charge, do you think you could have possibly received the endorsement of the FOP?
So it's very important to recognize what the FOP is. The FOP stands for the Fraternal Order of Police. It is not the police department at all. It is a police union, and there are many of them all over the country, and they represent in different locations and different locals They represent different types of police organizations. So there are plenty of FOPs that are really great organizations in different places, and they're distinct and separate from their departments. The Fraternal Order of Police in Philadelphia, under the leadership of John McNesby, in a city that is 80% Democratic, endorsed Donald Trump. They did so in a way that outraged many of their members. It outraged many of their black members, many of their other members of color, and a ton of women officers. But McNesby is not like them, and the truth is he doesn't really represent them. What he represents is a particular type of throwback attitude, which unfortunately exists in a small number of the police officers who are still in the Philadelphia Police Department. That, frankly, can be and is defensive and apologetic about police corruption, defensive and apologetic about police brutality, and often, regrettably, racist. So he's one person. I deal with police officers all the time, 5 days a week. And there are a ton of good police officers who don't like him at all. The police commissioner has some very critical things to say about John McNesby. They have very little in common, frankly. And, this is part of the reason that I believe that to have a good police commissioner who wants to do the right thing, who is anti-corruption, who is anti-brutality, who has good ideas about policing, to have him working with a progressive district attorney who's going to stand up against the kind of nonsense that small group like McNesby spews can be very helpful.
What kind of relationship would you have with McNesby, though, considering you said if you worked with the progressive DA that could possibly change, you would be the most progressive candidate, correct?
I am the most progressive candidate. I don't think there's any dispute about that. The relationship with McNesby would be whatever it wants it to be. If he wishes to promote things that I consider to be backward-looking, if he continues to try to justify police brutality, then that will be a shame because I'm not going to tolerate it. The reality is that you need to have a district attorney who doesn't do whatever McNesby wants. You need to have a district attorney who works with the legitimate authority in the department, who is the police commissioner, and works with the rank and file. You don't need to have a district attorney who's so worried about the political consequences for his or her own future that they're going to bow to a union official who is not even an active police officer and hasn't been for a very long time. McNesby, the truth is that McNesby is pretty much irrelevant. The reality is that the police commissioner, that the leadership within the department, and the rank and file police officers are what matter. I don't really care about their endorsement. I actually said from the beginning I did not want it. Not because I don't want the endorsement of the rank and file, I do, but I don't want the endorsement through that representative because I think he misrepresents them, and he's simply not someone with whom I wish to be associated.
Larry Krasner, thank you very much for joining us today. Again, you gave us plenty of your time. We appreciate it. We'll see you at the town hall tonight as well.
Great. I look forward to it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Krasner.
So there you have it. The candidate for Philadelphia District Attorney, Larry Krasner, one of the 7 Democrats seeking the office. Primary is next month.